Hello and welcome to the Soup Doctor. Today we're going to change things up a little bit and not make a soup, but we're actually going to make a marinara sauce. Now, traditionally, a marinara sauce consists of onions, garlic, basil, tomato, salt, pepper, red pepper flake, and that's basically it. We start by sweating the onions on a low fire. We sweat the garlic, we add the tomatoes, reduce it down by a third, add the basil, and that's it. So let's get started. Now, let me show you how to mince an onion. All right, we're going to cut it in half lengthwise, and then you're going to cut each end off, like so. You want to grab the end here, and you're going to peel it back. Now, what you want to do is look for what's called the corn. Now, the corn is this part here, okay? It's going to hold the onion together while you slice it. So what you want to do is cut it in lengthwise along its axis. Then again, like so. And then again, like so. Now, the size of the mince is a personal preference, but for marinara, I like to do it a bit small so it cooks down and it's not so discernible in the finished product. And you want to discard the corn after you're done cutting because it doesn't have very good flavor or texture there. So there is the onion. Now, the next thing we're going to do is slice the garlic. So what you want to do is put the garlic on its side and you're going to press down, kind of mash it until it breaks apart, okay? And it's going to expose the individual cloves. All right, so to peel the garlic, you want to grab it by its little tail here and you give it a little whack, turn it over, whack it again, and generally that will help the garlic come out of its shell. And then you want to peel this little root end off and discard that. And then you're going to cut it in half, or I should say crossways, in very thin slices. Now these thin slices expose a lot of cross-sectional area and they release a lot of flavor. They also maintain their shape in the sauce, so if somebody has an aversion to a big piece of garlic, they can just eliminate it from their fork. So here we have the minced onions, the sliced garlic, basil, and tomatoes. And what we're going to start with is a slow sweat of the onions in a copious amount of olive oil, salt, pepper, and red pepper flake. After about 4 or 5 minutes of a slow simmer, we're going to add the sliced garlic for about 2 or 3 more minutes, add the tomatoes, reduce them by a third, and the sauce is done other than adding the basil. Now, the onions and garlic have been sweating very slowly for about 7 minutes. They're translucent, they're golden, they're very soft. And what that has done is develop the sugars of the onions, which will complement the tomatoes. And a lot of times I hear people adding sugar to their tomato sauces, and that's probably because they're not using whole peeled tomatoes and they haven't sweat their onions and garlic properly. Now, what the tomato is of choice for marinara sauce is a whole peeled tomato, and what you want to do is mash them up by hand, okay? Now we're using about 6 quarts in an 8-quart stock pot, 2 onions, and about 6 cloves of garlic. So what you want to do is grab your hand and you're going to get deep in there and you're just going to squeeze them up. Now, a little trick here is you want to make sure your hand is on the bottom, because if you squeeze it on the top, it's going to squirt out and hit you in the eye, okay? So you want to mash them up until they're all dissolved, they're all mashed up, and we're going to add them to the onions. Now, the tomatoes have reduced by about a third, and we're ready to finish off the sauce. But before I do, I want to emphasize why I insist on whole peeled tomatoes. Now, whole peeled tomatoes are generally picked at their peak of ripeness, and they provide for a very consistent, high-quality product. It's very predictable. I prefer that over the puree or, say, the crushed, because you don't know what you're getting in those cans, and the seeds within a crushed tomato generally add a lot of bitterness. So if you find yourself adding sugar to your sauce, you've done one of 2 things. You haven't used whole peeled tomatoes, or you haven't sweated the onions slowly enough to develop their own natural sugar to provide for a very good balance of sugar and acidity. So now that we've gone over that, let's add the basil and finish up our sauce. So as you can see, the sauce has been reduced by about a third, and we're going to rip the basil into the sauce. Now, I like to rip the basil in big pieces, and I like to do it right at the end. If you put it in too early, it kind of loses its steam, and you don't get that fresh basil flavor. So after we rip it in there and discard the stems, we're going to stir it around and cook it for another 10-15 minutes. Now, 2 things before you're ready to serve. One, you want to taste it to see if it needs salt or pepper. And if the tomatoes were a little firm from the can, what I like to do is take a potato masher and kind of make sure that they're all broken up into even pieces. This gives a nice consistency to the sauce. It has a nice whole tomato bite to it, but there's no overly big pieces. And it kind of homogenizes the sauce.